This video may be a bit weird. A while ago I had a thought about Jedi Fallen Order. I sat down to write it, and next thing I knew, I had an entire rant about this replayability. I recorded it and started preparations for editing, but then I started having second thoughts. Because this channel is supposed to be about game design. So allow me to talk on the topic of replayability in general for a bit, then end it with the aforementioned rant. I'll try to be brief. To quickly move past the games not related directly to the topic, in multiplayer, be it cooperative or competitive, the main source of replayability comes from other people. Because even if you play with the same people, by the virtue of them being, people, they will play differently each time. And that's the key to replayability. Novelty in any shape. Having new interactions with another player. Trying out a different character, build or weapon. Aiming for secrets left undiscovered and achievements not yet earned. Sometimes the game has enough such elements for you to play through the same parts of it, yet do so differently. Other times the game gives you a different environment to play through. Be it a randomly generated dungeon in a roguelike, a new game plus mode or a second quest. Something that developers included with the intention of making the game last longer, which was especially valuable in the days of early consoles where you had very limited storage space to work with, and as such, including a mode just different enough to engage the player while reusing most of the assets was the best you could do. And players too can provide their own replayability, be it by playing with arbitrary rules, like the Pokemon Nuzlocke or one of the million different challenge runs you can find on YouTube these days. Even I had some ideas I was considering trying out. Or through mods. Yes, mods. In some cases, a bigger source of replayability than the game itself. Not constrained by a single creative vision, they offer novelty in an unmatched quantity, even if the quality of it tends to vary. Randomizers are a particularly interesting type of mod to me, because they don't really add anything to the game, they just reshuffle existing elements. And that is, in fact, their greatest strength. They give you a way to find completely new experiences, despite playing the same content over and over. But there are people who replay the same content over and over without any modifications. The same game, the same playstyle, sometimes thousands of times. I am, of course, talking about speedrunners. Because novelty isn't the only source of replayability. There is also a more intrinsic drive to improve, to master the mechanics, which of course favors repetition, familiarity, the exact opposite of what I've been talking about so far. So, if replayability can be found both in novelty and in familiarity, how can a game ever mess it up? Well, I'll let past myself rant about that particular topic. Spoiler warning for Fallen Order, obviously. Do you know what soulslikes and Metroidvanias have in common? I find them both extremely replayable. I have filled up all the save slots in Elden Ring with finished games, nearly done so twice in Dark Souls Remastered. I've beaten Area of Sorrow, Metroid Zero Mission and above all else AM2R many times. Even the more linear Metroid Fusion I got 2 or 3 playthroughs out of, and the only reason Hollow Knight isn't in the same category is that I got burnt out with it after recording 120 hitless boss fights and so many more where I failed at doing it hitless. Point being, I love both these genres, and I love to squeeze every last moment of enjoyment out of them. And then if they're moddable, doing it all over again. So, Jedi Fallen Order, a Star Wars game with elements from both of them, seemed right up my alley. So, I've got it something like a year ago. And did it meet my expectations? Well, as a Souls-like, after beating it, I described it to a friend as Diet Sekiro. With some elements from it, but not really committed to the idea. Still, enjoyable enough in that regard. As a Metroidvania, it's rather linear. The only noteworthy thing you can do out of sequence is go to Dathomir and get the double-bladed lightsaber early. But again, it's functional. There is some exploration and some good enough backtracking. It had just enough for me to want to replay it immediately after beating it once. Especially when I saw a New Game Plus button in the main menu. That one, however, quickly died. Why? Well, let me ask you this. What is New Game Plus? And since I can't hear you, let me answer. It's a mode you unlock after beating a game, which allows you to play through the story again, while retaining the items or experience you have obtained in your previous playthrough. Usually also featuring higher difficulty, in one way or another. There is of course more nuance to this. Dark Souls 2 in particular features some extensive changes to its world in New Game Plus cycles, and it's typical for the game to take away progression items to prevent you from just skipping immediately to the endgame. And in Fallen Order, this button is a lie. You don't enter a New Game Plus cycle. You enter a completely new game. Nothing changes about the story. Nothing changes about progression. And nothing is retained from your original playthrough. I of course wasn't expecting to keep the unlocked force powers, be it one's upgrades or any other exploration items. That would let you completely break the game, and you just don't see stuff like that outside of indie games. You could probably make it so you can still use them in combat, but then only interact with the environment once you unlock them again. But that would admittedly be extra work. Do you want to know what wouldn't be that? Just allowing the player to maintain the skill tree progress. Or the double-bladed lightsaber and the split saber attacks. Anything at all other than the utterly useless skins, which at that point feel like the game spitting in your face and going, "Oh, see? You didn't lose everything." Also, unskippable cutscenes, really. The story isn't terrible, certainly far better than most of the Star Wars content that came out since, but that doesn't justify forcing the players to sit through it. And besides, Knights of the Old Republic had a better story, and did allow you to skip past most of it, despite being an RPG where the story is arguably the main reason to play it in the first place. Why? Because it understood that players might, for instance, want to play through the game again, and as such they might not be interested in hearing the things they already know. And clearly, Fallen Order also expects the player to replay it because it has a mode called New Journey Plus. A mode, mind you, that was added months after the game came out. There was time to actually make it worthwhile. Even if you didn't want to change the game world, or add an alternate route, or add a new playable character or a new weapon. Even if you didn't want to bother making progression carry over. The absolute least you could have done is make the cutscenes skippable. If the game code was up to any kind of industry standard, this could be achieved in less than 10 lines of code by an intern vaguely familiar with the way cutscenes work. One of these issues I could probably look past. Unskippable cutscenes I consider a cardinal sin of game design, but I would put up with them if it meant fresh gameplay or more time spent as the endgame calm. Achievement hunting and improving the mechanical skill has its own appeal, but the prospect of sitting through all the cutscenes again kills what fun I could derive from it. I just cannot fathom how you can add in an update, a mode unlocked after beating the game once, that is functionally identical to a completely brand new game. What is even the point? And since I'm already complaining, don't you miss those times when lightsabers actually felt like lightsabers? I don't need to see them slice off limbs or leave marks on walls when they just barely graze them, though both are nice touches, but I would like to have them feel like the deadly weapons they're supposed to be. In this game, on the normal difficulty, you know, the one that is supposed to be an intended experience, bosses are absolute damage sponges that you can hit often, sure, but each individual hit deals next to no damage. It feels closer to playing Dark Souls with an unupgraded dagger than actually having a lightsaber duel, especially considering the fact that your enemies have no problem hitting you for half of your HP bar, meaning that you are allowed very little mistakes. That being said, there is one moment in the game where everything just clicks. The final visit to Dathomir and the fight against the fallen Jedi. You have been steadily growing in power through the skill tree and unlocking new abilities. You just repaired your lightsaber, and now you are thrown into a well-paced boss fight that tests you on your combat ability, while also switching things up with opportunities to use your force powers and to deal actually satisfying amounts of damage thanks to a special attack you got after repairing your lightsaber. That was without question the highlight of the game for me. I don't hate Fallen Order. Most of the time it's a competent game with a few strong moments, but I am so disappointed in the way the great replayability potential it had was absolutely butchered, and as a result I probably won't play it ever again. I don't know if Jedi Survivor is any better in these regards, because it was a broken mess at launch and I'm not going to support that with my money. Maybe if it ends up being discounted by some insane amount on Steam, I'll give it a shot. But for now, that's all I had to say. And after the time it took me to put together the D&D puzzle videos, it's nice to talk about something that I can express all my thoughts about in 3 pages of script instead of over 20. If you want to hear me talk about game design more, subscribe, and until next time, farewell. Now, since recording that rant, some of my thoughts have changed, because I decided to see if I can find exactly what my thoughts about Fallen Order were that year ago when the experience was fairly recent. And I did. To summarize the thoughts I had that I didn't mention in this rant, the more minor annoyances were overshadowed in my memory by the unskippable cutscenes, but they clearly weren't the only user experience problems I had. The game has quite a lot of pointless parkour that doesn't provide any challenge, it doesn't trust you to operate the camera, and disappointed me when it comes to the customizability of controls. And yes, I play Souls-likes with mouse and keyboard. Feel free to yell at me in the comments. I've heard it all already. Anyway, the rest of the thoughts I had I clearly remembered pretty well, because they are all reflected in the rant. Though I do want to bring up this summary I gave. This isn't Metroid where new upgrades make you more effective in combat but don't change the primary gameplay. This is a Souls-like where you start with less than a third of your moveset. I'm going to have to thank Last Year's Me because this is a good way of describing how I still feel about this issue. If the game waits a few hours before giving you access to a mechanic that you'll be constantly using throughout the rest of it, then having to play without it again will simply be less fun. I also looked through the mods available for this game to make sure there wasn't one that would allow skipping the cutscenes. I didn't find one, but what I did find was a modified save file that was someone's DIY New Game Plus, which I've apparently downloaded before. Which reminded me that I did try playing through Fallen Order a second time using it, but the unskippable cutscenes did in fact kill my interest completely, even with the option to play as a late game cull. So to put all these thoughts into some kind of conclusion, working towards skill mastery and getting new experiences adds to the replayability, whether they are built into the game or self-inflicted, but tedium, be it grinding, forced waiting or returning to some unfun mechanic, can kill the replayability otherwise present.